Given that f of x equals 1 minus x squared and g of x equals 2x plus 1, we want to find or answer these questions here. Okay, so the first one is to find f dot g of x. Right now, this is a composite function. Okay, the inner function we see is g of x, right? So, we could rewrite it like this. Okay, this is just another way to write this, but essentially, we're going to take f of x, okay, and evaluate it not at another number, okay, but we're going to evaluate it at another function, right? So what does that mean? Right, it means that this should equal 1 minus x squared, okay, because this is f of x, right? But notice I had to put an x here, right? I put parentheses. So what should go in the place of this parentheses? Well, it should be g of x, right? It should be the other function here. So let me just put that here, 2x plus 1. Okay. So this is going to be f dot g of x. Okay, now, we can multiply this out and simplify that, okay? But let's move on to the next problem, right? This is g dot f of x, right? So we can rewrite this like this. So g parentheses f of x. So this tells us that g is the outer function and f is the inner function. Okay? So similarly, right, what is g of x? The function g of x is this guy, 2x plus 1. But notice I put a parentheses here instead of x, right? So why do you think we can do that? Well, what should we put here in the place of this x? We should put the other function, right? We should put the 1 minus x squared here. Okay? And this is g of f of x. Okay? So you notice that here we leave the x here, right? So that means that we're just going to evaluate at the other function. What does this mean? F of g of negative 1. Okay? So this means that we're going to take the composite function of f of g and evaluate that at negative 1. There's two ways to do this. Okay? So you notice that in part A, we actually found f of g of x, right? So that means, right, this is f of g of x. So how do you think we could find f of g of negative 1? We can just plug in the negative 1 in here and get our answer. Okay? So that's one way to do this. The other way to do this is to actually find g of negative 1 first, right? So let's do that. Let's find g of negative 1. So that's 2 times negative 1 plus 1, which gives us negative 2 plus 1, which is negative 1. Okay? But then what do we do with this negative 1 here? Okay? So remember, that is the inner function, g of negative 1. We got negative 1 as that answer, so the next thing to do would be to evaluate f at that value. Okay, so 1 minus negative 1 squared is just 1 minus 1, which is equal to 0. This is the final answer. Okay. So for g of f of 2, we can sort of do the same thing, right? This is g of f of x. Okay, this is g of f of x. So one way we can do this is to just plug the 2 into here and evaluate this expression here. Okay, the other way would be to do this in steps, right? Let's take f of negative 2. Let's find that first. Okay, so f of negative 2. Now we're going to use f in this case, right? So this would be 1 minus 2 squared, right? That should be a positive 2, right? All right, so 1 minus 2 squared. Okay. So 1 minus 4, which is negative 3. Okay. So f of 2, right, not negative 2, f of 2 is equal to negative 3. But what do we do with this negative 3 here? Right, with this negative 3, we should plug that into g, the outer function. So we're doing this in steps, okay? So g of negative 3 then, okay, is going to give us what? Okay, 2 times negative 3 plus 1, negative 6 plus 1, which is negative 5, right? That's going to be our final answer.